Your team of authorities has just found out that a nuclear bomb is being concealed by a terrorist group in London. Such a bomb could wipe out the total population of the city, an estimated 8.9 million. Luckily, the leader of the group has been captured and knows exactly where the bomb is located. Yet, he refuses to disclose such information. In this case, torture will prove essential to help your team find out where the weapon is. As the clock ticks down for the bomb to explode, however, a question remains. Is it still unethical to torture this man, considering that millions of lives are on the line? Throughout history, torture has been used against prisoners as an extreme method of interrogation to unveil what could be crucial information. In some cases, this torture has been praised for being successful, and in others, it has been seen as morally unacceptable. But what draws the line between justified and unjustified torture? Can the use of torture against prisoners ever be justified? See, when we think of torture, we tend to think that the receiver is always guilty and has done something gravely wrong to deserve such a punishment. For what other logical reason would they be in that situation in the first place? Alas, this is not always the case. In 2003, located 20 miles west of Baghdad, was a U.S. Army detention center, commonly known as the Abu Ghraib prison. In this prison were captured Iraqis. Several thousands of them were civilians who had been picked up in random military sweeps and at highway checkpoints, including women and teenagers. Hajj Ali, one of the 3,800 detainees held at the center during the height of its scandal, claimed to be deprived of food and water. In fact, most prisoners were forced to live in tents or in prison yards. Now, this is only the tip of the iceberg of Ali's torture and abuse. For later, they beat and sexually assaulted him with a rifle. It is important to note that not only did he suffer physical torture, but psychological as well, as he heard the screams of women being raped every night in the prison. Other prisoners at Abu Ghraib also endured cases of sexual assault and degradation, such as forced nudity and forced sexual acts. Dogs were used against frightened detainees, sometimes to the extent where the prisoners being interrogated would urinate or defecate themselves. Pouring cold water onto naked detainees, beating them with a broom handle and a chair, and head blows were also common in Abu Ghraib. Ali was only in the prison for 4 days before he was dumped off onto a highway in Baghdad. In 2004, graphic photos of the torture that occurred in the prison by U.S. military personnel were handed over to journalists Seymour Hersh and CBS. These images were then released to the public, who were astounded as to what they had just seen. Many of the photographs depicted American soldiers sexually assaulting detainees, threatening them with dogs, putting them on leashes, and forcing them to partake in other acts that are considered torture by the Geneva Convention. This convention consisted of a group of meetings that produced agreements in terms of humane treatment for war prisoners. Some of the photos taken at Abu Ghraib are shown in the next slides. Here is Sergeant Michael J. Smith using a dog to scare a tied-up prisoner. In this photo, Sergeant Ivan Frederick interrogates a prisoner chained to a wall in an extremely uncomfortable position. This final picture shows Ali being tortured under a black hood. The main question is, can the inhumane treatment of these prisoners ever be justified? Now, let's go back to the ticking bomb situation. In 2006, the BBC conducted a worldwide poll to solicit various perspectives surrounding the justification of torture. Just to remind you, in this situation, torture could be used to save millions of lives. Yet, a large majority of the world opposed this mistreatment of a suspect, even if its purpose was to reveal information that could stop a potential terrorist attack. 59% of the world's citizens were unwilling to compromise on the protection of human rights. The following slide highlights countries where opposition was highest, including Australia, Canada, France, Germany, Great Britain, and Italy. 29% of those questioned by the BBC, however, thought that governments should be allowed to use torture to some extent in situations where it was deemed necessary. What's interesting is that this support for torture was generally greatest in countries who found themselves actively engaging in a fight against political violence. Shown in the next slide are some examples of the percentage of citizens questioned per country who agreed to the use of torture. 37% in China, 42% in Iraq, 43% in Israel, 40% in the Philippines, and 36% in the United States. What this poll suggests is that countries that face political violence are far more susceptible to accepting the notion of using torture to a certain extent if there is an extreme threat identified. In a way, it helps us understand the logic behind why torture has been said to be justifiable. Countries that have been significantly impacted by political violence, such as terrorism and rioting, are willing to do anything to make sure that such events do not occur again, even if it means infringing on another individual's basic human rights. For instance, prior to the 9/11 attack in 2001, the United States had a history of being susceptible to terrorist strikes. Notable attacks include the 1978 to 1995 mail bombings by Ted Kaczynski, the 1993 bomb explosion in New York, the 1995 bomb explosion in Oklahoma, and the 1996 bomb explosion in Atlanta. Now, imagine if prior to the 9/11 incident, a terrorist with information that could stop the attack was captured. Torturing the information out of him would have saved the lives of every Twin Tower victim, a total of 2,997 people. So when asked if he still deserves the punishment, the question seems like a no-brainer. As a result, many people argue that torture is acceptable as it might be the only way to elicit crucial information from detainees fast enough to save those at risk, such as in the fabricated 9/11 situation. The problem, however, is that confessions made under the pretense of torture may not always be accurate. Returning to the Abu Ghraib situation, according to Ali, 99% of the people brought into Abu Ghraib were innocent, but with all the insults and torture, it made them ready to do just about anything. Ali's words were not far from reality, for according to the media company Al Jazeera, approximately 70 to 90% of the prisoners at Abu Ghraib were mistakenly detained. Many of these people were put under high pressure and were forced to confess to crimes that they did not commit. Even so, the U.S. Army Intelligence Manual emphasizes that the use of force is a poor technique as it yields unreliable results, may damage subsequent collection efforts, and can induce the source to say whatever he thinks the interrogator wants to hear. Now, I want each of you to imagine yourselves in such a situation, being held in a prison against your own will. Every day, you are brutally beaten by authorities in the aim of eliciting a confession to a crime you have no knowledge of. The human body and mind can only take so much before they give in to the pressure just to make the pain stop. And the only way to make it stop is to start talking. Thus, the credibility of confessions elicited under the pretense of torture is certainly questionable. While it may seem like torture is effective in getting prisoners to talk, this does not mean that they are telling the truth. Furthermore, torture can even slow down the process of solving a crime. For authorities may be forced to investigate the lies prisoners tell them under pressure. In situations where a time crunch is present, such as that of the ticking bomb, the last thing an investigator wants to be told is lies. Take the example of Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, a terrorist involved in the 9/11 attacks. After his capture, Mohammed was tortured by the CIA, during which he confessed and disclosed the names of others involved in the attacks. His confessions led to the arrest of many suspected terrorists. Yet, what is important to note is that all of these men were found to be innocent. In fact, Instead of using torture as a means to produce confessions, 2 psychological surveys have suggested that the most productive way to solicit reliable information from prisoners is by building rapport. What's more is that neurological science has also played their part in proving that torture and abuse are ineffective methods of interrogating prisoners. According to neuroscience professor Shane O'Mara, memory, mood, and cognitive function can be compromised with the use of both physically and psychologically abusive interrogation techniques. When it comes to eliciting accurate information, however, it is evident that memory, mood, and cognitive function are not components that can be jeopardized. So, if not torture, then what can we use? Going back to the rapport building, pretending to be friends with the prisoner is significantly more effective when it comes to soliciting crucial information. A study published in 2014 by Jane Goodman Delahunty of Australia's Charles Sturt University interviewed 34 interrogators from Australia, Indonesia, and Norway. These interrogators handled 30 international terrorism suspects, many of them including potential members of the Sri Lankan extremist group Tamil Tigers and the Norwegian-based Islamist group Ansar al-Ismal. When asked what strategies they used to solicit information from these suspects and what the outcomes were, the winning technique involved a rapport-building approach. According to Delahunty, when a rapport-building technique is used for interrogation, disclosure is 14 times more likely to occur. In addition, confessions to crimes were 4 times more likely to happen when the interrogators used a neutral and respectful stance when speaking with suspects. What also increased the rate of disclosure was if the detainees were interrogated in a comfortable physical setting. Another example of success from the rapport-building method would be that of a former U.S. Army interrogator who claims he was able to obtain information from an Iraqi insurgent over a shared bond of watching the TV show 24 on bootleg DVDs. Because of that connection, the Iraqi insurgent started to recant a lot of information he had said in the past and turned to giving the interrogator more accurate information in its place. Delahunty also states that rapport-building strategies include things like humor and expressing concern for the suspect, and that they are found to be far more effective compared to torture. Thus, speaking with a suspect in a way that shows humanity is significantly more productive than beating or abusing them. Showing another person humanity builds trust, while beating them does the exact opposite. Think about it. Would you rather disclose some of your deepest secrets to your best friend or your enemy? It's an easy choice. Yet torture is still being used around the world as a method of extracting crucial information from prisoners. An example being the Guantanamo Bay detention camp in Cuba, which opened in January 2003 and is still holding and torturing prisoners to this day. And at the end of the day, it is important to realize that these prisoners are humans, just like us. When one can stand there and commit such heinous crimes upon another human being, what makes them different from the criminals we have kept behind bars? Thank you.